Hey, welcome back everybody. Showing up on camera at the start of the video because the YouTube algorithm apparently requires that from me specifically now for some reason. But it's time for the monthly oil production levels updates. So heading right on down the list, starting with a former OPEC member, one of a quickly growing set who have left as the organization continues to disintegrate over time. Angola peaked up at about 2 million barrels per day a couple decades ago. They have since declined down closer to 1, but are adding enough offshore fields just quickly enough to stop themselves from going under it and are currently around 1.1. Azerbaijan peaked up at about 1.1 around a decade and a half ago. They have since declined down below the halfway point, down to now about 540,000 barrels per day. Argentina peaked closer to 800 in the past, declined down to 400, but shale fracking in the Vaca Muerta formation has brought them up over 900 again over the last 6 years. Now, this time coming in at 914,000. Australia also peaked at about 800 a while ago and has since declined down into the lower 200s, this time actually coming in as far down as 207,000 barrels per day. Algeria peaked at about 1.4, declined down close to 1, then was down close to 800,000 for the first half of the 2020s, frequently because of the basically eternal production cuts that were the reason why so many more OPEC members are quitting the organization. But Algeria has been bringing themselves back up to the 1 million that they had declined down to, and they would have declined further in the background if not for a few small new fields that were added since then and some enhanced recovery stuff. And they have been able to get back up to now 995,000 barrels per day. Brazil continuing to climb upwards, now almost at 4.5 million barrels per day, as a massive expansion of some of their largest of operations at some of their largest offshore fields are fully brought online. They are now up to 4.48 million barrels per day. Canada up into the lower fives now, and they're probably going to end up curving out and plateauing closer to 6. They had dropped a couple times this year so far due to wildfires, and there are severe wildfires again right now. They're just not near the major oil facilities this particular time, so they're back up to 5.25. China continuing to hold on in the lower fours, coming in at 4.4 million barrels per day this time, while their domestic consumption in present day is usually up around 16 or 17. Colombia, continuing to decline down from its second peak of around 1 million, is now down into the lower half of the 700,000s, this time coming in at 725. The smaller of the two Congos, the more stable one, with oil production, is continuing to hold out and wobble around in the upper 200s, this time coming in a bit down from last time at 274. Ecuador, almost 100,000 or almost 20% down from its all time peak of 550,000 barrels per day, now down in the usually 450s, this time popping back up just a little bit to a flat 460,000. Egypt, once up closer to 1 million, has declined down by about half and is hanging out around 500,000 or so. Ghana in West Africa had declined from 214 down closer to 150. Some enhanced recovery stuff brought them back up to 190, from which over the past 2 years they've declined back down to 176. But two new offshore fields over the next year and a half will bring them up to close to 300. Gabon is at 207, having dropped down a bit from the 220s or so, where they were hanging out after declining from the 230s that they jumped back up to from around 180. Guyana is coming in just a bit under 900,000 barrels per day, as their first field, which was brought online over 7 years ago, or almost 7 years ago rather, is in its decline phase now, so that's weighing them down a little bit, but their fifth field is going to be brought online in the next couple months, and that will jump them up over 1.1 million. India had declined down into the upper 500,000s, but a medium-sized offshore field off of their eastern coast was brought online a month or two ago. That brought them back up just a little bit above 600,000, and this time it looks like they came in right around 600,000. Meanwhile, their domestic consumption has reached 6 million. Indonesia in present day has declined all the way down under 600,000 from the 1.6 million they used to hold for a few decades. This time they came in at 576,000. Iraq, before the Iran war started, was up around 4.5. They had to go down closer to 1 at the height of everything, but despite the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is now closed again, they are still able to get now close to 1 million barrels per day of oil out, thanks to 3 particular pipelines. Most of it's going through Turkey, but some of it is going through Syria. So they do have some diversion options. Plus they do have to produce 1 million barrels per day for their own domestic consumption. So their current production is around 2. Iran once held 6 million, collapsed after the revolution, only got back up to 4, and held that for a while until the mega sanctions started and they had to drop down to only 2. And after the sanctions were slightly removed, they were able to start increasing again, but they were only able to get back up to 3.4 because of field degradation. And they started declining from that even before the war started and were down to 3.1. They had to drop back down to 2 during the war because of the blockade and everything. And their latest numbers are from that brief window where it looked like things might be fine and the strait was open and they had gone back up to 2.5. Now they've probably had to cut back down to 2 again, but we have to wait for their next batch of data. Could not get Kuwait's most recent data. The only data provided was from a month ago during that window when the strait was open, in which they had gone back up close to 2 million barrels per day. Kazakhstan, up in Central Asia, is in the lower 2s in present day and is hanging out there, has been for a couple of years. They came in this time at 2.18. Libya almost got back up to 1.5 for the first time in over 16 or 17 years, coming in at 1.49. This month, however, they dropped back down to a flat 1.4 million barrels per day. Malaysia had declined from the 800s down into the 400s. However, some new of their few remaining offshore fields got brought online recently. That bumped them back up into the 500s, but now some other fields are shut down for maintenance for a few months, so they're back down into the 400s again, this time coming in around 472. Mexico continuing to hold in the upper ones, where they will be remaining for probably the next 4 or 5 years or so, as there is just enough slated to come online offshore. It should keep them from going up too far or declining down too far until we get into the 2030s. But this time they came in at 1.74 million barrels per day. Nigeria got back up to about 1.6 million for the first time in a while a month ago, but had to shut down some stuff again. So now they're back down to 1.51. Norway still hanging out around or a bit above 2 at 2.02 million barrels per day, with much more capability to keep going than the UK has, as the UK basically only really have the North Sea, whereas Norway has a lot more to work with. Oman is trying to bring themselves up to their maximum capacity to try to compensate for some of the lost Persian Gulf production, but they were already holding around 1 million barrels per day, and their maximum capacity is likely only around 1.3. But since the start of the year, or rather since the start of the Iran war, they have brought themselves from 1 up to 1.1 million barrels per day. Qatar, before the Iran war started, was normally holding around 1.3 and was going to start gradually declining. However, they had to drop down to around only 400 or so, only just barely more than their own domestic consumption. And they were going back up as it looked like things were okay for a few weeks. They got back up to 610,000 barrels per day, and then everything restarted, and now the strait is closed effectively. Saudi Arabia normally would be holding 10 million barrels per day, would have run into the end of their ability to hold that plateau naturally around like 2033, maybe late 2032, but they're going to be buying some time now as they're forced to be holding lower because of this. They currently came in at 7.4 million barrels per day. as they are able to divert and export close to 5, usually between 4.5 and 5, through their east-west pipeline, and then their own domestic consumption in present day fluctuates between 2 and 3 million. Russia in present day has not been officially publishing their data for quite a while, and they declared it classified information, and effectively sometimes just give random statements, like the most recent statement. After all the intense damage that's been done to their pipelines, refineries, storage, export terminals, and everything else, they gave a ridiculous statement about how none of that matters and how their production is actually increasing. In reality, despite their claims of being up higher around, or now claiming that they're going up above 9 million barrels per day, they are somewhere very ambiguously down between 8 and 8.5 million barrels per day, most likely. The US continuing to undulate in a thin margin around its peak or plateau range, coming in this time again at 13.8 million barrels per day. As for now, 2+ years, it's been repeating the same pattern of declining by a few 100,000 as shale has reached its limits, plus all the conventional stuff that's still there in the background declining as well, before a large new project offshore or back up home in Alaska will come online all at once, super boost the US up, back usually very frequently to 13.8, from which it then resumes declining. So here it is again for the fourth time at 13.8 million barrels per day. The UK peaked at about 3 million barrels per day, and since then, over the decades, has declined down, now under 700,000. This time, they jumped back up from the lower 600s, though, up to 670,000 barrels per day. Vietnam held a plateau in the mid 300s for a couple decades, but has since dropped down into the upper 100s. However, they have stalled their decline here. They haven't gone down further for a little bit. This time they came in at 186. Venezuela once held a plateau at about 3, but when the country collapsed in the late 2010s, they took the oil production down with them, down to only 400,000. Without too much outside help, they were only able to really slowly drag it back upwards up to about 1 million over the course of about 5 years, which was obviously the reason for the 24-hour war, the U.S. intervention, as the new Venezuelan government immediately capitulated to all demands and allowed outside oil industries in, who have begun bringing the production back up much quicker. They got as high as 1.25 earlier. Most likely outlook for the moment is back up to 1.4 or as high as 1.5 by the end of this year. The UAE, during that brief window where it looked like the war was over and everything was fine, brought their production back up past where they were pre-war and almost got to the 4 million barrel per day plateau that they wanted to hold for quite a while, and which drove them to leave OPEC. So the UAE went all the way up to 3.8. However, now that everything's shut down again, they can only export the 1.8 that they can get out through the pipeline that currently exists to Fujairah, and then add their own domestic consumption, which remains suppressed because of everything going on in the region. So most likely they're back down now to around a total production field output of 2.5, but we won't know until this month's data comes out next month. But anyways, that's it for this one. Thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.